Hi there, in this tutorial we're going to paint this fabulous pair of cowboy boots, and we're going to use complementary colours that are more or less opposite each other on the colour wheel to make the sort of dark tones and all the tones in between, because these two, when they mix together, make a really nice dark. And the colours I'm using is actually quinacridone rust by M. Graham, but if you've got quinacridone burnt orange, or if you've got burnt sienna, that's fine, that'll do, and it sits roughly there on the colour wheel. It's a muted red orange, and then I'm using French ultramarine, which is a muted sort of a darkish navy blue, and I'm using Winsor & Newton, but any navy blue or mid blue will do for that. Okay, so if you want the paint along pack for this, then you can become a patron of mine, and you get the paint along pack, you get the outline, and you get the supplies list, and you get all of those same paint along packs for every other watercolour whiz I've ever done as well. They all become free to you if you become a patron of mine, and there's a little link at the top corner of this screen, or there's a link in the description of the video below as well, so that's well worth checking out. Okay, plus when you become a patron of mine, not only do you get these Watercolour Whizz tutorial packs, you get over 25 hours of really long watercolour tutorials on all sorts of subjects, so plenty to get your teeth into there over with me on my Patreon site. So let's go in with this. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is wet the whole inside of the shape, so everything that I can see inside the two boots, because there's actually one boot and then one just slightly behind it. I'm going to wet the whole inside shape, so if you can do that as well. See you in the next clip. Right, so the whole boot is wet. If I can just show you, let me get my protector underneath there. Just show you in the light how it's looking. See, there's a shine on there. We want to have that shine because now we're ready to drop in a wash. So I'm going to pick up a few brushfuls of water, about 3. Pick up some of this quinacridone burnt orange or burnt sienna, or whatever you're using that's a close match to that. Now that's really sort of vibrant, so I'm going to add a tiny speck of French ultramarine blue into that, and it just takes it down a fraction, because these two are complements, they work well with each other. So now we've got a really natural leather looking colour there, haven't we? I think neat from the tube, the quinacridone burnt orange might be a little bit too orangey, although whatever, you know, you get boots in all sorts of colours. So now I'm going to drop this general, we call this body colour, so this is the main colour of the subject, which is brown, all over the boots. And of course, because I wet it, it goes on really quickly and really easily, and we've got no hard edges inside the boot at this point. Nice soft insides, so we've got plenty of opportunity to do some lifts. In a minute we'll do some lifting out of colour, and then we'll do some darker tone as well in a second, but let's just get this colour all over for now. Okay, so it's gone on a bit patchily, which I don't mind that. In fact, I quite like those patchy areas. They sort of could be where the leather is bulging, you know, as it is in the photograph here, and catching the light. So there we are, we've got some brown on. Now what we need to do is go for a darker tone now, okay? So as you can see on your grayscale, if you're a patron and you've joined and you've got the paint along pack, you can see it's much darker in some areas, isn't it? And then you've got some definite highlights. So let's go for those darker areas then. Let's pick up some more of this quinacridone burnt orange, make it a bit stronger. Let's pick up some more French ultramarine, and we'll go for a darker tone now, okay? And I'm going to paint this darker tone quickly in this moist paper and start getting these darker areas painted in. Again, don't worry if it bleeds over some of the paler areas, because we can use the thirsty brush technique to wipe those out in a second. But let's just get these darks in now. There's a bit of dark across the band on the front of the boot. And we need to put these dark areas in while it's moist and soft, so we get soft edged finished with these lovely dark areas which are starting to form the boot now. See, the boot's starting to come into shape already, isn't it? This just goes to show you, if you didn't believe it before, that painting is more important to have good strong tones, a mixture of light, mid and dark, than colour. Colour's not important, it's the tone that's important. We can tell this is a boot. You know, the colour's not important, it's the light and dark, isn't it, which forms the 3D shape of your boots on the 2D paper. So always bear that in mind, that if you're new to painting and you're skipping the tonal section in those art books and you think, oh, I'll just get on with the colour, go back and look at the tonal section, because that's the secret of painting, is getting good with tones. Okay, colour, you can use any colour. Tones are the important thing to form a 3D shape, which is what you're trying to do as an artist, isn't it? You're trying to form a 3D form on a flat piece of paper. So don't miss those tone chapters, as I did when I was first starting off painting. I couldn't wait to get onto colour and all the interesting stuff. And it took me a few years to realise, yeah, the tones are the thing. Right, so basically, you know, we've got a pair of boots there now. I mean, they're looking okay, aren't they? So a bit more dark in there, I think. Again, I've been using my tonal map the whole time. I'm looking at this and placing as best I can with this smallish brush these patchy areas of darker tone. Right? So, just there. Right. A bit more. I'm just bending that heel out a little bit more there. Making this a little bit thicker. Under the sole would be dark, wouldn't it? So I'm just using a bit of artistic license, just putting a bit more of a heavy wedge under that. Right, now before everything dries, if I can just show you, there's still some faint sheen, there's still some moisture in this boot. I'm using 200 pound 100% cotton rag paper, and it's really great. It holds the moisture better than wood pulp paper does. Okay. So I'm going to come along now with the small 1/4 inch brush, that sort of size, okay? And now I'm going to lift out those bright highlights which show us that this leather is shiny. So let's lift out the obvious ones. There's some there. Press, lift out. You might need to rinse it. Rinse it and dry it again. Press again. It might not come out the first time. Now there's this lovely fold here, isn't it? This curve in the leather. Let's get that in. So I'm curving and twisting my brush and then lifting off gradually. There's that fold in the leather that I like. There's another little highlight just about there. There's a highlight there. There's a definite highlight on the side of the boot, which is obviously bulging out, you know, where those feet have pressed out after many years of walking. So that's pressing out, so that's catching the light, and I taper it away so we get the shape. Then there's, if you can just make out it, there's a sliver of a highlight there, which separates the one boot from the other. So let's try and carve that out with this little small, this small flat brush. Do it again. Sorry if my hand's in the way, it's quite difficult to do this without covering up what I'm doing. I'm just going to use, again, artistic license to put the highlight down right on the front of that toe, so that the front boot is lighter than the boot behind, so it puts it in place, in perspective. Right, where else have we got some highlights? See there. And you've got to do this quickly while the paint is still slightly moist, because it lifts out more easily when it's moist than when it's dry. Then there's some highlights on the heel as well. There's a couple of chinks of light up on the tabs of the boot there. And again, just for artistic license, let me separate the one boot from the other by lifting out a highlight like that. And across the top of this one, why not? Then we can see that there's another boot behind it more easily, can't we? Because of that tonal contrast, light against dark. That shows us enough. Okay, and there we have the basis of a boot. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry completely. I'll see you in the next clip. Okay, it's bone dry, so let's put a few more details in on this boot. So I'm going to pick up some quinacridone burnt orange, a little bit of the French ultramarine in there to sort of neutralise it a bit so that it's not so bright. Keep that brown in keeping with the brown that we've already done so far. Again, this is all good judgment practice for your eye, you know, keeping your painting palette aside by the side of your subject and trying to gauge colour. If you want, you can also put some on a piece of paper there and hold it next to your painting. Okay, that shows me it's a bit too dark, so to lighten the colour in watercolour, we add more water to it. We never add white, unless you don't mind adding white, because if you add white, you're putting some opaque colour in, because white is opaque in watercolour. And if you want to be a purist, a watercolour purist, we never add white. We try and be clever and keep the white of the paper. Alright, so there's my darker colour now. Let's go in and put some details now, say in the band, you know, the strap coming across the front of the boot. There's a bit of an arc there around that sort of buckle. Bit of a shadow there. Shadow there. Then there's a sort of the seam. I'm going to paint the seam in a sort of lost and found way coming down the boot. By the way, as you've probably guessed by now, I paint these Watercolour Whizzes at a fair clip. I don't hang about, okay, because they're meant to be under 30 minutes for you to take them and run with them. If you want to paint more slowly and paint more refined job, as most of my students do, they end up painting a painting that's much nicer than mine because they're taking their time, then please do. All I'm doing in the Watercolour Whizz is showing you the process. You can choose to slow down the process or speed up the process as you wish. I'm just showing you the tonal map, you know, to get going and get some quick wins and confidence with watercolour. So you might see me working quite quickly, but you don't need to. You can take your time and make more of a meal of them if you want to, okay, because these are really nice little studies. They're low outlay, you know, you haven't got to spend a lot on paper, haven't got to spend a lot on time, but I hope that I keep reinforcing to you the importance of good tonal contrast, and for you to see tones. You know, make it your business as an artist to really see what's light, what's paler, what's darker, and what's very, very dark. And by doing, building up this habit of painting, looking at tones mostly, then you're going to get really strong as an artist and as a watercolourist. So now I'm putting a bit more dark along the ridge there and the sole. I've had lots of pairs of cowboy boots in my life. I love boots. In fact, I prefer wearing cowboy boots to shoes. I'm not a high heel person. I tend to fall over in those, so I love boots. I'm really going to push this dark behind on the second boot, you know, because that'll really push the toe of the boot in front forward, won't it? So I'm trying to make it a bit scuffy because it looks quite scuffed, that second boot there. So if the toe is scuffed here as well. Put a few darker tones under there. Right, let's move up to this area and paint that band on the second boot. And there's a bit more dark there, but I'm leaving a little millimetre or two between the front boot and the second boot, so I don't want them to touch. Then under that curve, that lovely curve of leather, let's bring that down, and then it goes like that. So all I'm looking at is shapes. I'm looking at the shapes that the leather is making and how they translate into watercolour areas on my boot. There's another sort of bulge that goes out there like that. And going up the seam again with a few little sort of lines of, I can see the sort of thread lines, just that sort of idea. Give the boot a bit more authenticity. Then I'm going back into that dark area I did because I feel it needs to go darker again with the darker passage of paint. And all these contrasts of dark, mid and light help us to see that what the boot is made of, that it's sort of a folding leather. Then in this sort of cleft there's a darker area which I'll put in with a tiny brush, the opening and the second boot. You see that opening is in there. Same with this one. Right, I'm going to have to stop the camera because now I've run out of paint, so bear with me a second. Right, got some more paint now so I can carry on with this work. So over on this side it's a lot darker as well. Let's go back in here and redefine that strong dark which is at the front of the boot, and then it sort of tapers away like that. Then there's a darker piece separating the two boots there. And again I'm going to go very finely and paint that in and leave like a millimetre, if I can just zoom in there, a millimetre between the front boot and the second boot. Let's get into this area now because there's a sort of few bands of dark there. This sort of strap that comes over the boot. Again, I'm not taking ages over this because I've got to keep this video to under 30 minutes. But this is a little bit of decorative work. You could do a lot more on this if you want to. We just want it to say boot. Okay, in these watercolour whizzes, I just want you to be able to say, right, whatever subject we're painting, I want you to get the gist and see the form of the subject immediately as you look at it. And the only way to do that is through, you guessed it, strong tones. Okay, so that's all I care about in these videos is strong tonal contrasts. And when you get confident at tones, the world's your oyster. You know, it's like suddenly you've sort of discovered the gears in a car. Without tones, you're only ever going to be surface painting. You're only ever going to be applying pretty colours and doing little details and stuff like that. Your work will probably lack that depth that you're looking for, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I'm going to have a bit more dark over here as well. I sense that this could be darker. And then I'll lose it into that strap. I like losing edges, lost and found. I like some edges to be visible and then some edges to be lost. And again, that adds a little bit of poetry to your painting, you know. Separates the men from the boys, as they say. Right, so let's have a look far away now. What's jumping out? A little bit more detail there. Bit of detail, a few little rough nicks and sort of a bit of distressed leather coming down there. Taper that down a bit. Right, I think I've got everything I want on there now. So I'm going to let everything dry, and then I'm going to come back and show you one last thing that I would do. Okay, so this is how it's looking at the moment. I think we need to maybe do a bit of unification now, because I don't know about you, the toes look a little bit too disjointed from the rest of the boot. Okay, so what you can do is when it's bone dry like it is now, you can come along with a moist, I've got a moist size 2 brush because it's a small area. I've moistened it really well and I've flicked it on the side of my jug, okay? So there's a little bit of moisture in the hairs of this brush, and that's all you need. And what I'm going to do is just start very gently on the toe, just brushing over and starting to dislodge some of that paint, and just take it up then into the front of the boot. Maybe brush up and down and soften in some of those little distressed marks at the back of the second boot. And just coax that out a little bit to unify those marks, because they were a little bit, they were making the boot fragmented, too fragmented, I feel. Same again, I'm going to rinse my brush and flick it again. So I've got a clean brush again. Same here on the side. I feel like we need a bit of unification from this top part where it goes up on the sort of the front of the foot down to the bottom. So let's start, say, in the band. So I'm just going back and forth very slowly, giving the paint chance to dissolve a little bit and bringing it down. Right, I've run out of water, so I'm going to rinse my brush, flick it again, start where I sort of left off, and keep on coming down the boot, going over that highlight a little bit, and just blending. Back up, so of the soft blending. Alright, I feel like it looks a bit better now. We can always recover that lost highlight, and I'd like to do that because now that I've given this front bit an extra sort of veil of colour, I could relift that highlight out of there. Again, you need to do it quickly because the drier it is, the harder it is to lift out. So let's just relift that highlight, and now it will look a bit more subtle because I'd put an extra veil of colour on the boot there. So it's given us still got the highlight, but it's not so disjointed. I felt we needed unification there. Okay, rinse my brush, flick my brush. I feel like I need to do the same thing here. So I'm going to start on this outer left hand side and go up and down. Very slowly, keeping the hairs low to the paper so they're making contact with the paper. So I've just bedded that in a little bit. I've given my boots a bit of a shine. Rinsed my brush, flicked it again. Let's start again over here, up and down. Keep the angle of the brush low so that the hairs are making contact with the paper. And then you subtly blend in some of the more patchy areas that might look a little bit, disjointed. Rinse, flick again. Over here now I'm going to start, say, at the outer on the right hand side and work inwards, up and down. Go just slowly enough to give that paint chance to just dissolve ever so slightly, and it'll just help you cover over the areas that were too white, maybe, And then again, let's start from the outer heel. I'm flicking my brush. Start here and then move in, up and down. And you'll see you putting a nice bit of polish on your boot, and it unifies everything a bit more. They look a bit classier now, don't they? They don't look so scuffed and worn. Alright, so let's go back in now and relift any of the highlights we really did like. And I did like this one here. So I'm going to go back in with this little thirsty brush. Actually I forgot. I got my Matthew Palmer brushes, which are a bit springier. So my Matthew Palmer lift out brushes will probably give me a better lift. So let's get in there with these. and that highlight went up there a bit. Then I had a bit of a highlight here. So now I'm just redoing any of those highlights that I had for my final touches now. And these little specks of light will really give your boot a bit of kick. You know, it'll have life. It won't be flat because you've been brave and you've given it some contrast. When we start off with painting, we normally want to be quite safe, don't we? And so we're scared to make really big contrasts. So some of us are. So if you feel that's you, then know that, you know, try and branch out and do some really strong contrasts. See how they look, because it'll bring your painting to life a bit more. It won't be uniform all over. It won't be samey, and it'll stand out. So here is a bit of a highlight under this boot. You've got to rinse and wipe your brush a lot, because some paint is a bit of a stainer. They stain the paper, and so you've got to be quick to get the highlight out if you want it, and you might have to insist and rinse and rub a lot of the time. For argument's sake, I'm just going to put one here as well. I feel like I could put a bit of a highlight there where that leather might be catching the light as it curves round. And let's put a really sharp one here just to separate. I'll do it this way, just to separate the back boot from the front boot. Just one little hard line will do it. You haven't got to do it all the way around the rim of the boot because it'll look a bit fictitious. Just one little highlight will do it. And then on these little tabs that are folding over, there's a few little highlights on there, so we'll get those. And then there's a little rivet or some sort of screw or button or button there, and a highlight near the buckle as well. And then there's a central line which has got a bit of a highlight in there. It's probably the sewing, where the sewing line is showing up. And actually, let's get a bit more of a highlight here. And finally, I want to highlight right on the front boot, on the front, on that bit there going down into the toe. Right, how will I look at now? Okay, shiny pair of boots. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have enjoyed it, would you please do me a favour and click that thumb if you've liked it? That would be really useful. It does count towards my, it counts towards my channel if you do that. And if you feel like leaving a comment and you are so kind to mention the words Watercolour Whizz when you type in your comment, that also gets my videos found a lot more easily. When people are searching for Watercolour Whizz, they'll come up. So if you leave a comment at all, that'd be really great. And of course, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And when you do subscribe, click the red rectangle and then you'll see a grey bell. Click the grey bell as well, because if you don't click that grey bell, you won't get alerts. Alright, so again, thanks very much for watching. I hope this has helped you become confident. Look what you've done. You've gone from this complex boot, with everything going on, all the shine, all the folds, all the details. You've used the tonal grayscale if you're a patron and you've printed off this pack. It's just £3.60 a month, and you get everything. And you've produced a boot, in under 30 minutes. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.